Have you ever been people watching? There's a park near my house that I like to people watch in. Let me tell you about a typical day here. The sky is filled with the most amazing cirrostratus clouds. There's birds chirping in the trees, wind chimes jangling from a house neighboring the park, children playing, yelling at each other in delight, and every once in a while a cyclist speeds by. And all amongst this idyllic scene are people, each one with a unique story. I found people watching to be an endless stream of character and story ideas, and I have a tried and true process for every session to capture everything I see accurately. It works like magic. In this episode, I'm going to share my process with you. I'm Michael Laron, and this is the Writer's Journey podcast, where you get a window into the life of a working science fiction and fantasy author. I'm on a mission to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I share my progress and discover what inspires my books and how I write them. You can find the show notes for today's episode at michaellaron.com/podcast. This week, I'm talking about the writing life. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the podcast. In this week's episode, I wanted to talk about my process for people watching because it makes for deeper stories and deeper characters. A lot of people watch, but I've found the most effective sessions I've had were the ones where I did it intentionally. Now that sounds counterintuitive, right? After all, if I said I was going to the park intentionally to find subject material and watch someone, it'd be a little awkward, a little stalkerish, and a little creepy. That's not what I'm talking about. I almost never people watch on purpose. But when I find myself in a situation where the people are interesting, I have 7 questions that I ask myself that help me capture the setting, the people, and the mood with stunning accuracy. These 7 questions are magical. It's amazing how well they work. It goes without saying that whenever I find myself in a great situation, I pull out my phone. I use the Evernote app to capture my thoughts, and a benefit of Evernote is that it lets you take notes, photos, and sound. Anyway, the first question is, what do I see? I write down what I can see. I start with the setting. I describe a sentence or two, what it looks like. Then, if I'm watching a particular person, I describe what they're wearing, what they're carrying, or what they're sitting or standing on. Colors are also important and something that may not be easy to remember later. The second question I ask is, what do I smell? If I'm in a restaurant, that's really easy. I describe the food in the air, and if I'm at a park, it's usually grass or flowers. If I'm elsewhere, then it's usually more difficult, and I have to really pay attention to what my nose is telling me. And I've found over the years that I've been able to develop and describe some things that I wouldn't have never called out at first glance. Unless there's a really strong smell, this is something that I tend to forget later when I'm trying to recreate the scene, so I try my best. Also, if I'm watching someone, I'm probably too far away to smell anything on them like cologne or perfume. Sometimes if I can't smell anything in the moment, I'll make up details that I think go with the situation, just so I can capture it in all dimensions. The third question I ask is, what do I hear? What's the surrounding ambience like? If people are talking, what are they saying? I write down dialogue to the very word, paying attention to dialect, cadence of speaking, and word choice. This is so important when you're creating characters. If there's music or if there's someone singing, I get creative about describing the music that they're performing without capturing lyrics. The fourth question I ask is, what can I taste? If there's no food involved, I look for anything that might help me capture this. The fifth question I ask is, what can I touch? I'm usually not in a position to touch someone, and usually that would get you put in jail. So instead, I focus on textures. Textures on the floor. Textures on surfaces like jewelry and clothing. The person's skin. Describing textures is one of the best ways to develop as a writer. Most people can describe sights and smells, but a pro weaves in texture. Textures also have the benefit of doing double duty when you're using them. If I said that a woman had an alligator purse, you would both see it and imagine the texture. See what I mean? And you've probably caught on that I'm simply describing the scene in the 5 senses. But there are 2 more questions that take my observations to the next level. The 6th question I ask is simple but fun. What's the story here? For people, it's, what's this guy's story? Or what's this woman's story? At this point, it's all imagination. I use what I can see to make some simple assumptions about the person. Even if those assumptions are wrong, it doesn't matter. It's just me exploring mentally where I think this person is coming from. If it's a man and a woman sitting across from each other, based on their body language, I can tell if they're on a date, married, or just friends. Any of those scenarios is always interesting to explore. I start with an assumption and ask, what's the story? As I describe it, I then ask, what if? What if this couple sitting at the table next to me in the French restaurant are on a date? What if the guy is from Canada and the girl is from New Mexico? What kind of culture clashes would they have? What's his story? What's his mom like? Where does he like to travel? What really pisses him off? What does he do for a living? I write and I write and I write. And then I ask the last, most important question. What does the person think of this place? Something I learned from Dean Wesley Smith, a writer who I look up to, is that it's not enough just to describe the setting in the five senses. Your character also has to have an opinion about the setting. If you're in a hot swamp and you hate swamps, well, that's going to color what you see, smell, hear, taste, and touch, right? But if you're in a restaurant with someone of the opposite sex and you're having the time of your life, you're going to have a much more favorable opinion of the setting. I like to write a few sentences about the person I'm watching and what they think about the place that they're in. This way, everything they see and do is filtered through that lens, and that guides what kinds of words and descriptions I would use if I were to ever write them in a story. It's a simple but very effective tool to help me get inside a character's head. So that's how I people watch. To recap, I ask, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? And what can I touch? For bonus points, I then ask, what's the story here? What if questions? And what does the person think about the setting? This is the process I use to capture everyday scenes. You'd be surprised how much I consult my sketchbook when it's time to write my novels. And another secret that I'll give away, when I'm writing a scene for a novel, I like to take a minute or two and imagine the scene in my mind. I imagine the people, sights, tastes, smells, textures, sounds, and character opinions before I put the character into the scene. I find that it makes things more realistic. If you want to see my people watching process in action, check out a couple of my previous sketchbook episodes. Episode 2, Love in the Food Court, and My Run-In with a Weird Pyramid Scheme, episode 16. Next week, I'll be posting another people watching session I had that was both fun and vivid. Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed the show, here are a couple ways to help a brother out. If you're listening to this on Anchor, favorite the show. If you're listening to this on a podcast app, do me a favor and write me a review and share it with your friends. You can, of course, visit my website and learn more about my work at michaellaron.com. If you have a question, send me a voice message on Anchor and you just might hear it on the show. Next week, I'll be reading a page from my writer's sketchbook. Until then, I leave you with a quote. Develop a passion for learning. If you do, you will never cease to grow. Anthony J. D'Angelo.